All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Eden Faith Wolf and family, in memory of beloved father, grandfather, and great-grandfather Cyrus Wolf, Shalom ben Tzvi Hirsch Zichron Livrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. But with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Lamed Gimel 33. We are picking up on Lamed Beis and with Beis 32. I will say actually a very interesting Gemara today. So remember, I will say just to reorient ourselves a little bit on Lamed Beis. Lamed Beis, and Beis, we had a Mishnah that spoke about the following case: that if a person goes ahead and places an Eruv in the Elon, a person places an Eruv in the tree, so the Mishnah was Mechalik. Mishnah made a distinction between where you're placing the Eruv. If you place the Eruv above 10 Tfachim, the Eruv is not good. If you place the Eruv below 10 Tfachim, the Eruv is good. So the Gemara was trying to figure out what exactly is this particular case. So we'll say, so if you remember again, the conclusion that the Gemara ended off with, which was the explanation of Rav Nachman and name of Shmuel, they were talking over here about a tree that is standing in Rishus Harabim. The tree is 10 Tfachim high and 4 Tfachim wide, and your kavana is to establish your makom shavisa on the ground, which is in the Rishus Harabim. And ultimately, again, so we'll say, how can you go ahead, if your intention is to go ahead and put your, so you want to establish your makom shavisa in the Rishus Harabim. So therefore the Mishnah says, if the Eruv is below 10 Tfachim, that means the Eruv is in the same Rishus as you are. Because remember again, the airspace of Rishus Harabim only extends up to 10 Tfachim. So great. So we'll say, so therefore, if the tree is in Rishus Harabim, I establish my domicile in Rishus Harabim, the Eruv is within 10 Tfachim of the tree, we're good to go. Above 10 Tfachim, that's problematic. Why? Because above 10 Tfachim on an area that's 4 Tfachim wide is what? A Rishus HaYachid. That's problematic because then I am one Rishus, my Eruv is another Rishus, and the Eruv is not good. But 1 second, there's the problem. How could a person access their Eruv? You can't take something from a tree on Shabbos. Remember again, that was the position of Rebbe. Rebbe holds that halacha l'maisa, anything that is asr mishum shavus, anything that is an isr midirabanan, ultimately is not asr bein hashmashos. So therefore, and again, this works beautifully because when does the Eruv take effect? The Eruv takes effect bein hashmashos. So therefore, technically speaking, I can access my Eruv bein hashmashos, and therefore halacha l'maisa, the Eruv is good. Good. So we'll say, says the Gemara. Now we begin. Amar Rava. So Rava comes along and he says, by the way, lo shanu ela be'ilan ha'omed chutz le'iburo shel ir. The tree that we're talking about is a tree that is outside of iburo shel ir. We'll say, I don't think we've spoken about this in passing. We'll see this sugya, of course, in its entirety. We'll say ibura literally means like the pregnancy of the city. We'll say, what does that mean? There's just like when a woman is pregnant, so her stomach extends. So Chazal made like a little bit of a pregnancy bump for a city, which means normally we would say, where does the border of a city end? It ends at its outskirts, at the wall, at the last house. So Chazal said that there's another 70 2/3 amas that we tack on to the boundary of the city. So wherever the wall is, or wherever the last house is, the real halachic border of the city is another 70 2/3 amas outside of that. Rashi says, Ibura shel ir, kol bayis sheyeshno b'sok shivim ama ushirayim li'ir kari ibura shel ir paraketes and marvin. So we'll see this a little bit later on. But the idea is anything that's within 70 2/3 amas of the city is considered inside of the city. So watch this. So says Rava, we're only talking about over here a tree that is within the city. Outside of the ibura shalir, outside of the additional boundary. Aval ilana omid besoch ibura shalir. But I will say, watch this. If the tree in question is within the 70 2/3 amas, ultimately of the city, then afilu lemala me'asara havi ze'eruv. The most is incredible. Rava says, then even if you place the eruv above 10 tfachim, the Eruv is still good. So I just want to clarify. So we ended off saying that the case we're talking about over here is where I am in Rishus Harabim, the tree is in Rishus Harabim. So what did the Mishnah say? If I place the Eruv above 10 Tfachim, the Eruv is not good because the Eruv is in Rishus HaYachid, I'm in Rishus Harabim. If I place the Eruv below 10 Tfachim, perfect, we're all in the same Rishus. And again, it's Rebbe who holds that there's no Isser D'Rabbanan, ultimately being Ashrash. Beautiful. Comes along Rava and says, by the way, this above 10, below 10, only matters if the tree is outside of the 70 and 2/3 additional boundary. But if the tree is within the Ibura Shalir, within the 70 and 2/3 boundaries, ultimately whether you put it above 10 or below 10, it doesn't matter, the Eruv is good. Why? Incredible. Why? The Gemara says, "The Masa Kiman de Mal Yedamya." This is fascinating because a city is viewed as if it is filled all the way up with dirt. Now, what does this mean? So what Rava is saying over here, is actually quite fascinating. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Demasa mitoch shehimu kefes yishu mechitzas ve'ina magula chazina lekiman demal ya'afra v'havya kiman denes kavin lishbos lamala me'asara. So let's listen to this. When you have a walled city, Rava says, we view that entire area as if it is filled in. As if it is filled in. Therefore, I will say what that means is that if you have a tree within 70 and 2/3 amas, so we view that entire tree really as one rishus, as one domain. And therefore, whether you place it above, whether you place it below, above 10 or below 10, the Eruv is going to be good. I will say this is an incredible insight. So Rav is saying, as long as that tree is within the 70 and 2/3 amas boundary, an entire city, if you can imagine, the walls are considered to be like the entire area is filled in. Therefore, the entire tree and the individual are in fact standing in the same rishos. I don't understand that. Well, if that's the case, then the truth is this should work even if halacha lamaisa, the tree is outside the ibura shalir. Why Rabbi say? Listen to this. Damarava hanosi eruvo. When a person puts down their eruv, Rabbi say, now we have not seen this gemara yet. We'll see it as, I think it's Shabbat, a little bit later. So the Gemara says, so what happens? So when you place down your Eruv, Yeshlo Arba Amos. So let's listen to this. Wherever you place your Eruv, you automatically have Dalit Amos all around that Makom. Which will say, makes sense, the same way that Halacha Lamaisa, in general, a person has Dalit Amos, right? Wherever you are kind of giving your own airspace, personal airspace of Dalit Amos, or area of Dalit Amos. So it's when you place down your Eruv, you have Dalit Amos around your Eruv as well. So the Gemara says, and Rishus HaYachid Ola Ad Rakia. And ultimately, again, Rishus HaYachid goes up to the sky. So we'll say, really, if you think about this, any time you establish your Makom Shavisa by a tree, so that tree should really be included in your Rishus HaYachid, because your personal Rishus HaYachid goes Dalit Amos. Dalit Amos extends all the way up, and if that's the case, really any time, why should we make a distinction between if the Eruv is above 10 Tfachim or below 10 Tfachim? It's a good kasha. To which the Gemara says, Am Rav Yitzhak Drab Misharshia, Hacha Be'ilan Hanote Chutz LaArba Amos Askinan. Oh, but I'll say, what's the case? The case we're talking about is a tree whose branches extend outside of the Dalit Amos. To which the Gemara is saying, really, you're right. Meaning, enachinami. We'll say, imagine the case. So I have the tree. Now remember, Rav is saying that where's my tree? So my tree is situated outside of the 70 and 2/3 amas on the outskirts of the city. Chutz li'ibura shalir. The tree is situated in Rishus Harabim. I'm establishing my makom shivi. So let's just say by the trunk of the tree, by the ground, by the trunk of the tree. Now that's my Dalit Amos. If it's my Dalit Amos, then ultimately, again, my Dalit Amos goes all the way up to the Rakia. And if that's the case, even if the Eruv is above 10 Tfachim, I'm still in the same Rishus as my Eruv. Oh, so what's the case? The tree has branches which extend outside of my Dalit Amos. And what happens? Look at Rashi. Be'ilan, that's Rashi in the Daf. Shenofo note chutz la'arba amos, shusof atchum, ve'niach eruvo benofo chutz la'dalit amos. Oh, so we'll say, so what did I do? So I acquired the Dalit Amos around me. I placed but there's a branch of the tree that extends outside of my Dalit Amos. And it happens to be, for some reason, I placed the Eruv on the part of the branch that extends outside of my Dalit Amos. Top of Lamed Gimel, v'niskavein lishbos bi'ikaro. But I say my kavana was to establish my makom shvisa by the trunk of the tree. So now here's the problem. So halacha l'maisa now, my makom shvisa is by the trunk. I do have Dalit Amos all around my makom shvisa, and my Dalit Amos extends all the way ad l'rakia. Only one problem: my Eruv is situated on a branch of the tree that is outside of my Dalit Amos. So the Gemara says, umay lamala, umay lamata. So we'll say, so what does it mean ultimately again? What does it mean when it says above 10 Tvachim, below 10 Tvachim? Ultimately again, the hadar v'zakif. that I will say ultimately we're talking about a case where what? Where the tree branch goes ahead and straightens out. It goes up and straightens out. So if you have that guide with the pictures, so we'll say you could see this is the picture. This is the picture ultimately in picture number 162. Actually, you'll send it out. Picture 162. Again, we'll say it's not complicated, meaning essentially you could see over here you have the makom shvisa ultimately by the trunk. The tree branch extends out, and the tree branch then goes up. So therefore, there are two possibilities as to where you're placing your eruv. Because the tree branch goes up, you could place it lemala miyud, or you could place it lemata miyud, to which the Gemara says. Well, so take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, I'm sorry, the Hadav Zakif, Besof Nitiyaso, Umishkachas Beimala Umata Bezikifaso, Kigon Dinitiyaso, Kula Lamata Miyod, Dilas. Fine. So we'll say, therefore, that's the case. So therefore, I'm establishing a Makom Shvisa by the trunk of the tree. I have Dalet Amis. Only problem is that my Eruv is outside of the Dalet Amis. And now again, the tree branch extends, and the tree branch also goes up. So there are two different possibilities as to where I'm placing the loaf of bread on the tree branch. Either lamata miyud, in which case the eruv will be good, or lamala miyud, in which case the eruv will not be good. So says the Gemara, v'ha'i bari ma'isile derech alov. But 1 second, I will say, there is another possibility. I could still access that eruv, even if that eruv is lamala miyud. I could still potentially access it. How? If I were to go ahead and go across the tree. So we'll say if I were to go up into the tree and go across the tree, then halacha l'maaseh I could access the eruv. Now look at Rashi. V'ha'i boy ma'isile derech alov ki havi chutz l'dalet ames nami ulamala miyud kevan dedalet amosav ola adrakir rishus hayachid hari yochol lalos le'ilan ad lamala mi'asara v'litlo. I could access the eruv. How could I access the eruv? Assuming you're passing on like Rebbe, that there's no problem going on a tree ben hashmashas. What can I do? Listen to this. My makom shvisa is where by the base of the tree, right? So that's my rishus hayachid. Rishus hayachid is ola ad l'rakia, goes all the way up. Therefore, what? Technically speaking, there's no problem with me climbing up the tree. I could climb up the tree, get lamala miyud. Once I'm lamala miyud, anything lamala miyud, Rabbi say is what? Rishus hayachid. Therefore, technically speaking, what I could do is I could climb up the tree and then climb across the tree, grab the loaf that's lamala miyud, and shalom al Yisrael. So technically speaking, even if the eruv is lamala miyud, it should still be kosher. To which the Gemara says, Kishrab mikasvim alav. What's the case of Osai? The case that we're dealing with over here is that branch was a branch that the general public used in order to adjust their load. Look at Rashi. Kishrabim mekasvim on the tias hanof shechutz l'dal ramosav hanamucha miyud tehavi rishus harabim kiduula v'chi ma'isila lemala me'asara derech avira shal netia over ba'avir rishus harabim. So we'll say, so the issue over here, interestingly enough, and this is another picture, you can see it. This is picture 164. So I will say ultimately we're talking about a situation where the lower branch over here is the branch that is lower is under 10 tfachim, but it's the type of branch that the public used to use in order to go ahead and adjust their load. So we'll say because that area is a Rishus HaYachid, there's airspace of Rishus HaYachid that extends above it, and the problem is the loaf is on the other side of that avir of Rishus Harabim, and therefore, in order to get the loaf, so we'll say, so therefore, yes, technically speaking, I could climb up the tree because that's all Rishus HaYachid. Technically speaking, I could go across and grab the loaf that is also in Rishus HaYachid and bring it back to me. The problem is that in this particular case, in order to do that, I would have to carry the loaf through the airspace of Rishus Harabim. And that's going to be problematic. Therefore, the Eruv is really set aside for non-use. So the Gemara says, Ukidu ula damar ula, amutisha b'Rishus Harabim. From Mekasan and Ula says, if you have a pillar that is 9 tefachim tall, and the public uses it to go ahead and adjust their load on it, v'zarak v'nachal gabav, and you go ahead and you threw something, let's say dalar amas in Rishus Harabim, and it lands on it, chayiv. Ultimately, again, you will be chayiv. So we'll say, so if you look at Rashi, v'nachal gabav, tahavi le'akira v'hanocha mitchilas l'dal sov dal b'Rishus Harabim, v'al in Rabbi Mekasan alav, afagav the zark dalar b'Rishus Harabim, kevan dolo havi hanocha b'Rishus Harabim pater. So we'll say, so again, this is a very unique case because this is talking about a pillar Normally, if you were to go ahead and throw something dal ramas in Rosh Hashanah, and it were to land on a pillar that is 9 tefachim high, we would generally assume that you are not chayiv because you don't have a proper hanach, you don't have a proper placement. But because, not meaning it doesn't come to rest on the ground of the Rosh Hashanah, but because this is a pillar that the public uses, therefore halacha l'maaseh takes on the status of a Rosh Hashanah, and therefore halacha l'maaseh, if you were to throw something and it were to travel dal ramas and land on the pillar, you would be chayiv. So too over here, both say the problem is you can't access the loaf that is on the higher part of the branch, because getting it from the higher part of the branch will necessitate you taking it through the airspace of the lower branch, and the lower branch is used by the rabbim to adjust their load. Therefore, that takes on avir Rosh Hashanah. You would effectively end up carrying the eruv through the avir of Rosh Hashanah. Okay? So the Gemara says, my Rebbe or my Rabbanan. So we'll say the Gemara, remember again, the Gemara quoted the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe said that halacha l'maisa, anything that is asr mishum shvus, you can go ahead and do bin hashmasha. So we'll say that indicates to us that there's some type of machlokes. So what's going on? My Rebbe, my Rabbanan, the sanya nasno be'ilan lemala me'asar tvachim. We'll say, watch this case. If a person goes ahead and puts their eruv in a tree that is lemala me'asar tvachim, right, higher than 10 tvachim, what's the halacha? Ein eruva eruv. So we'll say the halacha is the eruv is not good. Look at Rashi. The lemala me'asara ein eruva eruv ukim not masnisin beniskavin lishpos beikaro v'nota chutz le'arba amos v'hader zakeh. So we'll say, so just so you understand the way we've now established this case. Is that the case of the Mishnah of a person who places their eruv in the tree and it's above 10 tefachim, the eruv is not good, is a very specific case. What's the case? Where's the tree? Rosh Hashanah, right? Where's my makom shvisa? Right by the trunk. My dalet amis, that becomes my rishos, but I placed the eruv, I placed the loaf of bread on a branch that extends outside of my dalet amis, for whatever the reason, outside of my dalet amis. So if the loaf is above 10 tefachim, then ultimately again, eruv is not good. Below 10 tefachim, eruv is good. Says the Gemara, Nasna ilam l'mala me'asar tefachim ein eruv eruv, l'mata me'asar tefachim eruv eruv, v'asar litlo. But I will say, if you placed it below 10 tefachim, then halacha l'maisa, the eruv is good, but you cannot go ahead and take the eruv on Shabbos. Now, why can't you take the eruv on Shabbos? Well, I'll say, look at Rashi, v'asar litlo. Afilo haydi lamata me'asara asar litlo l'machar b'Shabbos in ratzah li'ochlo mishum de mishtamish b'ilan v'afilo achi kanel eruv ben hashmashas the chayvan de shimush ilan shvus d'rabbanan lo gazra alav ben hashmashas. So let's listen to this. So halacha l'maisa. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, if you place the eruv within 10 tefachim, the eruv works, but of course you're not allowed to take that eruv on Shabbos. Why can't you take the eruv on Shabbos? Because halacha l'maisa, you can't go in and use a tree on Shabbos. So this is a fascinating idea. So the eruv is good, but totally inaccessible. You can't get it. Again, Rashi points out, but since ben hashmashas, you could have gotten it, it's okay. Besoch shlosha, mutar litlo. So let's listen to this. If the eruv was within 3 tefachim, meaning we'll say, what happens if you put the eruv in a tree, but it was within 3 tefachim of the ground? In that case, mutar litlo. We'll say, why is that? Because remember, again, what's within 3 tefachim? What do we call that? Loved. Loved is, we'll say, remember, whenever something is within 3 tefachim, it's considered as if it is attached to the ground. So interestingly enough, even if you put something in a tree, but it's within 3 tefachim, we don't view that as being in the tree. What do we view that as being? On the ground. So halacha l'maisa, you put it within 3. So interestingly enough, but apparently really what the halacha is like this. If you put an eruv in the tree between 3 and 10 tefachim, so halacha l'maisa, the eruv is kosher, but you can't access it. But within 3 tefachim of the ground, not only is the eruv kosher, but you can actually take the eruv on Shabbos as well. So it says the Gemara, Nasnal b'kal kalo tlo be'ilan. What happens, listen to this case, if you took the eruv, you put it in a basket, and you hung the basket on a tree. So what happens in that case? Afilu lemala me'esrim tefachim eruva eruv. There, Rabbi. So Rabbi says, I will say, in that case, even if you hung the basket more than 20 amos off the ground, ultimately, again, the eruv is an eruv. The eruv is an eruv. I'll say, so again, if you're hungry for pictures, so I'll say there's just another case over here. So this is picture 165. Again, it's just a picture of a basket on a tree. This one doesn't require so much imagination. Basket on a tree. So I'll say if you hung the basket, Rabbi says if you hung the basket on the tree, then halacha l'maisa, the eruv is kosher, even if it's above 20 tefachim. Even 20 tefachim. Good. Divrei Rebbe Chacham say, Kol makom she'asar litlo ein eruva eruv. And the Chacham say no. Any time that you can't access the eruv is not going to be good. The eruv is not going to be good. We'll say, so says the Gemara, v'chachamim ahiyah. So we'll say, what are the Chachamim commenting on? Well, when the Chachamim say any situation where you can't take the eruv, so ultimately, again, also, so we'll say, before we go on, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Nasna b'kakala fi l'mala me'asara eruva eruv. So we'll say, let's analyze this. So remember, Rabbi says that if you placed it in a basket, even if the eruv is more than 20 tefachim high, the eruv is still going to be good. Look at Rashi. Nasno b'kakala afilu l'mala me'asar eruva eruv l'kamad mefarish b'she'ena ilan rachav dalad va'asar litla lo garsinan di garsinan amai. Actually, all right, fine. We'll see this later. Says the Gemara. The Chum say kamakom shasro litlo ein eruva eruv. So Chum say any time that halacha l'maisa you cannot access the eruv is not good. So the Gemara says, what are the Chachamim commenting on? The Chachamim ahiyah, which part of this discussion are the Chachamim commenting on? Ilema seifa. So I'll say, if you want to say, ultimately, again, the Chachamim are commenting on the seifa, right? The seifa was, Rabbi says that if you place the eruv in a basket, even if halacha l'maisa the eruv is more than 20 tefachim high, the eruv is going to be kosher. See, if you want to say that the Chachamim are coming along and saying that halacha l'maisa the eruv is not good in that case, I will say, look at Rashi. Ilema aseifa. It's the first wide line in Rashi. The Ka'amar Rabbi nasno bekakala eruva eruv. V'amili Rabbanan hoel v'sof sof asar litla b'Shabbos mishum shimush ilon ein eruva eruv. The gazu ala shvus ben hashmashas. Well, say if you want to say the Chachamim is saying no, if you place the eruv in a basket, it's not good. Why? Because the basket is attached to the tree, and Chazal said that you can't use a tree on Shabbos. And maybe what the Chachamim are arguing on both sides is whereas Rebbe says that ben hashmashas there is no issue. The rabbis suspended their prohibition of tree usage ben hashmashas. The Chachamim disagree with that, and the Chachamim say that's not true. The Rabbanan did not suspend their prohibition. Lemak hasavi Rabbanon stadin asurn. Shabbos say that means according to the Rabbanon stadin are asurn. Shabbos say we had this in Masechah Shabbos if you remember the notion of stadin. Remember we had it actually by balichaim, by animals, right? Shabbos say which is when Chazal asked you to use something, do they just ask you to use it in the primary way, or do they ask the sides of it as well? So we'll say, for example, when Chazal said you can't use a tree on Shabbos, does that mean also you can't use anything attached to a tree? So for example, I can't use the tree, but I also can't use a basket attached to the tree. Is that what the Chachamim are saying? Ela aresha. Rather, again, the Chachamim must be commenting not on the Seifa, but rather on the Reisha. Look at Rashi again. Ela aresha. Kaimi Rabbanan to come Rabbi Nasna be'ilan lamata me'asar eruva eruv. V'yasar litla v'armili Rabbanan afagav. Really, the Chachamim arguing on Rebbe in the Reisha. Whereas Rebbe says, remember again, if you place your eruv lamata miyud, the eruv is kosher. Why? Because technically speaking, although you can't take that eruv on Shabbos, when can you take it? Ben hashmashas. And according to Rebbe, as long as you can take, right, since the rabbis suspended their prohibition ben hashmashas, and the Chachamim are disagreeing. The Chachamim are saying, no, Rebbe, the rabbinic prohibition of using a tree applies even ben hashmashas, and therefore halacha l'maisa again, the eruv is not good. So the Gemara says, well, hi ilan heichi dami. What's the case of the tree? Idalas be'arba makom p'turhu. So we'll say if the tree does not have, we'll call it a width, or really an area of 4 tefachim, then I will say again, if you have a height of 10 tefachim and you lack an area of 4 tefachim, halacha l'maisa, that's a makom p'tur. If it's a makom p'tur, there should be no problem accessing the eruv. So the Gemara says, v'i de'ispe arba, and if it has 4 tefachim, then kinasna b'kalkala my habi. Then I will say, what difference does it make if you use a basket or not? Rabina Reisha de Ispe Arba. Both listen to this. So Rabina says the Reisha. The first case I will say. Now the first case, remember, is just placing the eruv on the tree with no basket. With no basket. And I will say what it sounds like. And remember, everyone agrees that if the eruv is above 10 tefachim, the eruv is not going to be good. But if the eruv is below 10 tefachim, that's the machlokes Rabbi and Chachamim. And we will say, what is that machlokes based on? Interestingly enough, that machlokes is not really based on Hilchos Eruv. What is that machlokes really based on? Hilchos Shabbos. Hilchos Shabbos. Do you hold that rabbinic prohibitions apply ben hashmashas or not? Rabbi says they do not. Oh, beautiful. Well, if they do not, that means my Eruv is accessible to me ben hashmashas. Now, it's true, it won't be accessible to me the rest of Shabbos, but that's okay. I just need it to be accessible to me at ben hashmashas, and we're good to go. Rabbi will therefore hold that if the Eruv is lamata miyud, even though the Eruv is in the tree, the Shavus doesn't apply ben hashmashas, I can access the Eruv shalom Yisrael. The Rabbanan, the Chum say no. A Shavus applies even ben hashmashas, and therefore I said that Eruv was never accessible to you over Shabbos. Therefore, even if it's lamata miyud, it is still not a good Eruv. So it says the Gemara, Amar Ravina, Reisha de isbe'arba, Seifa de les be'arba. Supposed to listen to this. So Ravina therefore says, what's the case? What's the case? So the Gemara, Ravina says the Reisha, the first case, where you're just placing the Eruv in the tree, is where the tree has the requisite dimensions, ultimately again for a Rishus Hayochid, and ultimately again, for a separate Rishus. It has an area of Dalid. So the Gemara says, so therefore again the problem is remember, the loaf is placed. The loaf is placed in a Rishus Hayochid. My Makom Shvis is in a Rishus Harabim. So if it's Lamata Miyud, I'm okay according to Rebbe. If it's Lamala Miyud, I'm not. However, Seifa, the Les Be'arba, V'Kalkala Mashlimasul Arba. Let's listen to this. The second part of the Brisa is talking about a case where Lemaisa, the tree does not have the requisite 4 tfachim of, we'll call it width, but the basket, when combined with the tree, creates a makom dalid al dalid. Now watch this, says the Gemara Amud Beis, the Rebbe, Savarla Kreb Meir, Savarla Kreb Yehuda. Both say this is incredible. Rebbe holds both like Rabbi Meir and like Rabbi Yehuda. Now both say, what does this mean? Savarla Kreb Meir, the Amr Cholkekin lahashlim. So both say he holds like Rabbi Meir, who holds that we hollow in order to complete. Both remember we had this in Masechah Shabbos. Or actually, I guess we had it earlier. So Parakam, we had Daf Yud Aleph. Shabbos says, if you remember again, where this first comes up is by Hilchos Mezuzah. If you remember again, if you have an archway, right? Remember again, technically speaking, for a mezuzah, you need a tzura sapasach, you need 2 side posts, right, and a top beam. So we'll say, what happens if I have an archway? So we'll say, remember again, there was a machlokes of chokekin l'dela hashlim. Essentially, do we view, can you square off the archway in a way that would make the doorway subject to the halachas of mezuzah? So that's, and we find this it's not just by mezuzah, it's a couple of times. Chokekin l'dela hashlim means, halachically, can we use our halachic imagination to hollow out a proper halachic doorway, entranceway, rishus? So Rabbi holds, like Rabbi Meir holds, chokikin de lahashlim. And therefore, Rabbi say, in this case over here, interestingly enough, if I have a tree that doesn't have the requisite area, ultimately of dalid, but then I put a basket next to it, and with the basket, ultimately again, it could become dalid. Halachically, I could use my imagination and create a makom dalid. I will say, you can see this is the picture on page 166. So you can see again, I will say, that actually the picture over here is very good, because if you can imagine what it has is, imagine you have like a tree, and then you have a basket, but the basket is not round. Instead, one side of the basket has an indentation so that it sits beautifully flush against the tree. And when you have the basket together with the tree, then halacha l'mais, you have an area of dalit together. So we'll say, the shaila is, how do we view that basket tree area? Do we say chokekin kedei lahashlim? Essentially, do we look at the basket and the tree as coming together as forming one rishus, one area, or not? So Rebbe holds that halacha l'maisa chokekin kedei lahashlim. Yes, we could view the tree and the basket ultimately again as coming together to form one rishus. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, "Savala kramer damar kipa parakama chokikin lahashlemir rishus yochid gemura lohavi kevan they betachtis ila rachav dalet afagav debrosh rachav tekakol mashlim alei lohavi rishus yochid ela imkin maschilios rakbo." So skip a little bit. Fine. Actually, we don't have to. Good. So that's right. That's how Rabbi holds. We saw the Rabbi Yehuda, but he also Rabbi Yehuda holds that what? Damar ba'inon eruv amakum arba veleka. But he also has Rabbi Yehuda who holds that halacha lemaisa an eruv must rest on a makom arba'ah, and in this case over here, you do not have that. So you both say, in this case over here, without the basket, there is no area of arba'ah. So therefore, I both say that's how Rabbi holds. Rabbi will hold both like Rabbi Meir as well as like Rabbi Yehuda. Also like Rabbi Meir, chokekin kedei lahashlim, and ultimately like Rabbi Yehuda, that the eruv must go ahead and rest on a makom dalid, which without the basket you do not have. My Rabbi Yehuda, both say, by the way, where is this Rabbi Yehuda that you need a makom dalid? The Sanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Na'otz Korah Birshos Harabim. Interesting case. If you go ahead, and we actually saw this before, if you go ahead and you take a pole and you plunge a pole into the Rishus Harabim. I was supposed to say, so again, I just have a pole. V'nicho eruv aleh gava yod v'rach badalit eruva eruv. So I say, and I placed my eruv on top of the pole, assuming that the pole is 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide. Ultimately, again, if I did so, halacha lamaisa eruva eruv, then the eruv works. Ve'im lav, but if not, the eruv does not work. So the Gemara says, what? Adarabba, hu ve'eruva b'makom echad. We'll say it should be just the opposite. We'll say if I'm standing in Rishus Harabim, so the assumption is that, again, remember, I'm trying to make an eruv tchumen. So where's my eruv tchumen going to be? Where's my makom shvisa? Where am I establishing my domicile? B'pashtos in Rishus Harabim. So if I place my eruv on a pillar that is 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide, I'll say, what have I just done? I've placed my eruv in a separate Rishos. My eruv is in Rishus HaYachid. I'm in Rishus Harabim. That's not good. So what's going on over here? Adrabah, hu ve'eruva b'makom echad. Right, as meaning literally just the opposite. I need for me and my eruv, my eruv and I to be in one rishus. This is what it means to say. Gavoa asara, if the pillar is 10 tefachim high, sarach shehei berosha arba. Ein gavoa asara, ein sarach shehei berosha arba. But so this is actually very interesting. So therefore, what it means to say is like this: if the pillar is 10 tefachim high, then ultimately, again, it must have a width of dal tefachim. But if it's not 10 tefachim high, it doesn't need to have a width of 4 tefachim. So we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Look at Rashi. Gavoa asara, demedalya merishus harabim, sarach shehei barach ba'arba, shehei sham makom chashav. Eina gavoa asara, ein sarach shehei barach ba, dafilu pachos midalit eruva eruv. So we'll say this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, an eruv must be placed on a makom chashiv, must be placed on a significant area. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if the eruv is placed on a pillar that is less than 10 tefachim high, the pillar need not have dalet tefachim of space. Very simply, because anything less than 10 tefachim high essentially is considered to be the ground of the Rishus Harabim. But if it's going to be on a pillar that's 10 tefachim high, the eruv must be placed on a makom chashiv. Must be placed on an area of significance, therefore it must have an area of 4 tefachim. Okay, kiman, so as pain does this reflect? The lo Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. But we'll say this is not like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Here we go. This sign Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer, na'atz kana b'Rishus Harabim. If you placed a pole in the Rishus Harabim, v'niach b'rosho traskel, and you placed a basket on top of the pole. Now, Rashi points out over here, Traskel, Sal Rachav Dalid, Vizarak Mirishus Harabim, Vinoch Al Gabav. So we'll say the case over here is, I have a pole that is 10 tefachim high, but not 4 tefachim wide. I place a basket on top of that pole. That basket is 4 tefachim wide. 4 tefachim wide. Now watch this. Vizarak Vinach Al Gabav. Then I go ahead and will say, now this is just the Hotzah case. I'm standing in Rishus Harabim. I take an object, I throw it, and it travels Dalet Amos. So I'm staying in Rishus Harabim, I throw the object Dalet Amos, and where does it land? It lands in the basket. What's the halacha? Chayiv. The halacha is, I will say that I'm chayiv. I will say, now why am I chayiv? I'm chayiv because I've effectively transferred an item from Rishus Harabim to Rishus Yachid. Rabbi say, what's interesting about this case? What's interesting about this case is in this situation, the pillar itself has the requisite height 10 tefachim, but what? Does not have the requisite width of dalet tefachim. Yet I'm still going to be chayiv. So apparently you have a machlokes. We were just saying before that ultimately, again, it appeared we were trying to say that Rabbi holds like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. He holds like Rabbi Meir, and that we hold chokeking kedei lahashlim, and like Rabbi Yehuda, that ultimately, again, you need the eruv must rest on a makom chashiv. And what's the definition of a makom chashiv? At least the gabi Rishus HaYachid, 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide. And yet you see over here that Rabbi Yossi holds that even if the entire pole or pillar is not 10 tefachim wide, but there's a basket that rests on top of it, that's 10 tefachim wide, that's enough. So I guess Rabbi Yossi disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, to which the Gemara says, not necessarily. This is very interesting. I feel Tim Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Even Rabbi Yossi would agree in this case. In other words, Rabbi say, even Rabbi Yossi, who normally says that the definition of a makom chashiv ultimately, again, is a pillar that is 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, would agree in the case of the basket. Remember again, in the case of the basket, the pillar itself is 10 tefachim high, but not 4 tefachim wide. The basket itself has an area of 4 tefachim that is sitting on top of the pillar. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree with Rabbi Yossi that in this case, In fact, you would be chayiv for transferring an item from one rishus to another, or daled amos in rishus rabim. Why? This is actually very interesting. I will say, Hasam hadron mechitzta hacha lo hadron mechitzta. See, Rabbi said there's a fundamental difference. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Hasam hadron mechitzta hatraskel soveves es hakana shaytachol be'emtsaiso v'chi amrinon good achis mechitzos hatraskel ad hakarka nimtza kana mukaf mechitzos shechalalo arba v'suleka lemeimar midi. So Rabbi said this is what's interesting. In the case of the basket, sitting on top of the pole, you have the ability to employ the concept of good achis mechitzta. But say it's picture 167, if you're following along in the pictures. Good achis mechitzta, which I will say means what? This is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which means that you could halachically view walls as extending downward. In other words, I will say, when you have a basket that sits on top of the pillar, and the pillar has the requisite height but doesn't have the requisite area, and there's a basket that sits on top of it that of course doesn't have the height but has the requisite area, and that basket is centered on the pillar. So we'll say, how do we view things? We view the sides of the basket as if they extend all the way down to the base of the pillar. Therefore, the entire area is considered to be enclosed. We'll say everybody would agree. Now, why does this case work? Good achis, Rabbi say, will work in a situation where halacha l'maisa, the basket is centered on the pillar. When won't you say good achis, Rabbi say? In the previous case, like we had before, where the basket is on the side of the tree. See, Rabbi, remember again, what was the problem with the tree? The problem we were dealing with the tree is we had a tree that had enough height but didn't have enough area. It wasn't 4 tefachim area, but the seifa was the case where the basket was attached to the side. So Rebbe held, like Rebbe Meir, who said, Cholkikin kedei lahashlin. We could hollow out, use our halachic imagination, and create an area of Dalid. Obviously, the Chum didn't agree with that. But I will say, interestingly enough, why don't you say good achis mechitzta? I have a great idea. Just view the sides of the basket as if they extend all the way down, and now have an area of Dalid. Because I will say, interestingly enough, a little wrinkle in good achis. When does good achis apply? Good achis will apply when the item is centered, when the wider item is centered on top of the more narrow item. Which will say makes sense, because essentially what you're doing over here is you're bringing down the walls of the kli all around. So essentially when you could bring down the walls all around the smaller item on which it is anchored, then you say good achis. This is really fascinating. So when you have the basket centered on top of the pillar, then you could say good achis. But lamaisa, when the basket is next to the tree, then ultimately, again, you won't say good achis. It's just that Rebbe holds that it'll work because halacha l'maisa we say chokikin kedei lahashlim. So says the Gemara, Rebbe Yirmiyah Amar Shiny Kalkala. So we'll say, listen to this. Let's go back for just a moment. So Rebbe says like this, that halacha l'maisa, even in the case of the basket, look at Rashi. Shiny kalkala, Rashi says, Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, Li'olam masnisin de le'el reisha v'seifa v'rochav dalid. V'dikakashi l'cha kinas me'kal ha'av. So remember again, Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to suggest as follows, that both cases, the reisha and the seifa and the brayso, are both talking about cases where the tree was 4 tefachim wide. If that's the case, then Lamaisa, why does the basket make any difference? Well, listen to this. This is incredible. Rabbi Yirmiyah, I'll tell you why the basket makes a difference. So it says the Gemara. So remember again. Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to suggest as follows. So the Seifa, which says that if you go ahead and you put it in a basket. So remember, what did the Seifa say? Reisha said, if you put the Eruv in the tree, Lamala miyud not good, Lamata miyud good. Seifa said, but if you attach the basket to the tree and you put the basket and you put the Eruv in the basket, even if the basket is lamala miyud or really lamala me'esrim, the Eruv is good. Why? Abba said, listen to how fascinating this is. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, I'm going to tell you the chap with the basket. Watch this. Says the Gemara, shiny kalkala, hoil v'yachol lintosa u'la'avir l'soch asara. Rabbi say, what type of basket are we talking about? This is no ordinary basket. Look at picture 168 if you have it. This is a swivel basket, gadlus. He'll say, watch this. In other words, the basket is on a little bit of a hinge. So what can you do with this basket, Rabbi saying? So really the basket right now is situated lamala miyud. Rabbi say, but what can I do? I can rotate the basket, without taking the basket off the tree. I can rotate the basket down, and retrieve the Eruv lamata miyud. You hear this, Gadlus? They will say what you could do is, because you could turn the basket essentially upside down. So the basket swivels. It's on whatever, it's on a pole. It doesn't have to be, it's not a complicated contraption. But lamaisa, I could go ahead and turn the basket so that the opening of the basket now is lamata miyud on Shabbos. And now I have the ability to retrieve my Eruv. That's the case of the basket. That's when it says that if you put the Eruv in a basket, even if the basket is lamala mi'esrim, ultimately the Eruv will be good. What's the case? The case where you have a swivel basket, since technically speaking you could swivel the basket down, and the opening of the basket is lamata miyud, halacha lamaisa, the Eruv will be accessible. Incredible. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Yosef Rav Papa v'kamar lahashmaisa. So Rav Papa was saying over this particular ruling, Eisvei Rav Bar Sheva Rav Papa. So Rav Bar Sheva was bothered by something. What was he bothered by? We'll say he was bothered by the following issue. Keisad hu oseh molichum barishon umach shechalov v'notlo. So we'll say this is now going to get into an interesting case, which we'll start today, but we'll really have to continue Meretz Hashem tomorrow. The case in question over here, I will say, is where a person goes ahead and wants to make an Eruv for Friday going into Shabbos. So we'll say, so now it's Eruv, it's Shabbos going into Friday. I'm sorry, Yom Tov going into Shabbos. Friday always goes into Shabbos, right? This is Yom Tov going into Shabbos. So what do you do in a case where you want to structure your Eruv? So Yom Tov going into Shabbos. So Ketzur Molicho. What do you do with Eruv? So this says the Gemara Molicho Barishon. You take your Eruv to the desired spot on the first day. Now, we'll say, now the first day in question again is going to be Thursday night. So this is Yom Tov, right? So I want to make an Eruv Tchumen. Remember again, the halachas of Tchumen still apply on Shabbos. So I'm going to go ahead and take my Eruv to the desired spot, ultimately again on Shabbos. You know, we're going to stop over here because we'll stop over here. We'll pick up with this case, but just understand where we're ending off. Where we're ending off right now, Bosa, is as follows: that halacha l'maisa. Everybody seems to agree in a regular case of above 10 tefachim in the tree, it's not going to be good. Below 10 tefachim in the tree, it will be good. So the Gemara says, Machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim, right? Whether or not we say Chokegin Kedei Lahashlim, ultimately again, whether or not it has to sit in a makom chashiv. Now in the basket case, it appears that the way we're defining the basket is the reason why the basket seems to work under all circumstances is because the basket in question has a swivel ability. And because it has a swivel ability, therefore, again, you could technically access the Eruv by pointing the basket down, retrieving it lamata miyud, and therefore the Eruv is going to be good. Whether or not such a setup should actually work or not, halach l'maisa, we'll see in tomorrow's daf. Shkach,